Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. On tonight's headlines. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck off the Alaskan peninsula, triggering a tsunami warning for areas within 200 miles of the epicenter. The United States reports another spike in coronavirus deaths as President Trump acknowledges the pandemic will get worse, while across the globe, a second wave causes record infections in Australia. China accuses the United States of slander after two Chinese nationals were indicted for seeking to steal coronavirus vaccine research and hacking hundreds of companies. And the United States has ordered China to close its consulate in Houston and accused it of ramping up spying operations, dramatically escalating diplomatic tensions between the feuding superpowers. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck off the Alaskan peninsula. It triggered a brief tsunami warning for areas within 200 miles of the epicenter. From our EBC Alaska Bureau, here's Ronnie Lee.
Earlier today at approximately 10:21 p.m. in the evening, the National Weather Service issued a tsunami warning to those living here on the island of Kodiak. Kodiak Island, as well as those living in the southern part of Alaska and along the chain of Aleutian Islands, were given this warning following the 7.8 earthquake that hit the southern part of Alaska. All of the residents were advised by the local authorities to move to higher ground or inland until the warning was lifted. Residents were also being directed to either seek shelter at the top of Pillar Mountain or Kodiak High School. The tsunami warning did not last too long, though. After 2 hours, the residents in Kodiak were advised it was safe to return to their homes. For Eagle News, reporting from Kodiak, Alaska, this is Ronnie Lee, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump embraces masks, and he implored Americans to wear one. And he shifts his tone on coronavirus as the crisis continues to accelerate in the U.S., where more than 141,000 people have already died. Take a listen.
Well, I do actually do it when I need. I mean, I carry the mask when I have to go. I went into Walter Reed Hospital the other day. I have the mask right here, and I carry it, and I will use it gladly. No problem with it. And I've said that, and I say, if you can, use the mask. When you can, use the mask. If you're close to each other, if you're in a group, I would put it on when I'm in a group. We are in the process of developing a strategy that's going to be very, very powerful. We've developed them as we go along. Some areas of our country are doing very well. Others are doing less well. It will probably, unfortunately, get worse before it gets better. Something I don't like saying about things, but that's the way it is. It's what we have. You look over the world, it's all over the world. America's youth will act responsibly, and we're asking everybody that when you are not able to socially distance, wear a mask, get a mask. Whether you like the mask or not, they have an impact, they'll have an effect, and we need everything we can get.
The United States on Tuesday recorded 68,524 new coronavirus cases in the previous 24 hours, according to Johns Hopkins University in its real-time tally. The country, which is the world's hardest hit, has now registered a total of 3,891,893 infections, according to the Baltimore-based university at 8:30 p.m. local time GMT Wednesday, 12:30 GMT Wednesday. Another 961 more deaths were recorded, bringing total fatalities to 141,883. The U.S. has seen a resurgence of cases, particularly in the so-called Sun Belt, stretching across the South from Florida to California. And Australia recorded its biggest daily surge of COVID-19 cases, mostly in the Victorian state. Victoria, where nearly 5 million people in the capital city of Melbourne are now in a 6-week lockdown, said it had found 428 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours, a record number of daily cases for Australia.
July the 22nd. Today we are reporting that in the past 24 hours, 502 people have been diagnosed as new cases of COVID-19 in Australia. This is the single largest daily number of diagnoses of COVID-19 in Australia since the pandemic began. The previous highest reported number of new cases in a single day was 469 cases almost 4 months ago on March the 28th. We reported only 2 cases on June the 9th, less than 6 weeks ago, and this shows how quickly outbreaks can occur and spread.
There's been a lot of commentary, a whole lot of people who don't necessarily think that this virus is real or think it's somehow a fundamental attack on people's human rights. I just remind every Victorian that nurses and doctors wear masks when they're treating you, and I don't think it's too much to ask Victorians to wear a mask so that they don't finish up in hospital or contribute to somebody else finishing up in hospital. I think Victorians will embrace this, and I'm very grateful to them for doing it. It's a small thing. It's unusual, but it will make a difference. That's the medical advice to me. For the sake of avoiding some criticism from a small, I think, group of people, I was hardly going to ignore the advice given. The advice is, at this point in the pandemic, the circumstances we face, the reality we confront, masks across the board will make a difference. And therefore, if you're told something will make a difference, then you're obliged to do it.
Melbourne residents will be required to wear masks outside from midnight, making the city the first place in Australia to mandate face coverings in public in a new effort to slow down the virus spread. The surge in COVID-19 cases in Victoria has been linked to breaches of mandatory quarantine by travelers returning from overseas. It has also stirred concerns of a second wave of an outbreak. Now, Mr. Andrews said further behavior change would still be required after analysis showed almost 9 in 10 people recently diagnosed with COVID-19 did not self-isolate between feeling sick and then getting tested. Just over half of the new patients also failed to stay at home while waiting for their test results, he added, saying authorities believe insecure work conditions were a key driver of the trend. There are growing fears about the virus spreading through vulnerable populations after outbreaks at several nursing homes, while inmates at 6 prisons have been confined to their cells after a guard tested positive. An inquiry into how the virus spread in Melbourne heard this week that many cases were likely linked to infection control breaches at hotels used to quarantine residents returning from overseas. Victoria has effectively been sealed off from the rest of the country in an effort to contain the virus, but new cases have been detected in neighboring New South Wales. Now, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian described the coming weeks as the most critical since the height of the last lockdown, when the state held the mantle of Australia's hardest hit region. New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, said it found 8 cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, saying they believe to have originated from Victoria. Take a look.
Whether or not you live in a community which has had cases or not, we want everybody to think seriously about what they're doing over the weekend to make sure you avoid crowds, make sure you avoid putting yourself in a situation which will compromise your health or those of others. Think about the number of people you're having into your home. We know from the health advice, we know from what's happened elsewhere, the highest risk activities are those inside your own home or those inside a confined space, such as a hospitality venue, and that's why the restrictions from Friday address those issues. The businesses involved have had a whole week to get themselves ready, so there is absolutely no excuse. Our message to the community is, firstly, thank you for getting tested. Make sure you keep the testing rates high. The mildest of symptoms, you should get tested. Secondly, if you've been asked to stay home for 14 days, make sure you do. Make sure you consider what you're doing over the weekend. Avoid crowds. Make sure you're COVID safe at all times, and make sure you're taking that extra level of caution. Can I say, in the most strongest way that I can, that the next few weeks are the most critical in New South Wales since the lockdown earlier in March and April. This is the most critical time for our state.
Meanwhile, the pandemic has already killed at least 616,995 people worldwide since its surface in China late last year, according to an AFP tally at 1100 GMT on Wednesday, based on official sources, with 14.9 million people infected. The United States has the most deaths with 142,068, followed by Brazil with 81,487, Britain with 45,422, Mexico with 40,400, and Italy with 35,073. All right, Japan has approved the steroid dexamethasone as a second coronavirus treatment, and the Tokyo governor tells residents to stay home during this 4-day holiday. Joining us live from Japan is Dennis Liu. Hello, Dennis. All right, Dennis, we can't hear you.
Hello, Alma. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Health Ministry has approved the use of the steroid drug dexamethasone for the treatment of novel coronavirus patients. Following the approval of remdesivir in May, dexamethasone has drawn international attention since it was reported in Britain last month that the drug reduced deaths among patients with severe cases of COVID-19. Dexamethasone was mentioned as a government-approved drug in a revised version of a Health, Labor and Welfare Ministry handbook for treating COVID-19 patients. The handbook, revised Friday, cited the inclusion of the drug in a study by the University of Oxford and revised guidelines for treating COVID-19 patients by the National Institutes of Health of the United States. Taking into account the results of the Oxford study, the NIH revised its guidelines to recommend that the drug be administered to ventilated patients and those requiring oxygen injection. The World Health Organization said the drug can be life-saving for patients who are critically ill with COVID-19. Meanwhile, Tokyo's governor on Wednesday urged residents of the Japanese capital to stay at home during an upcoming 4-day holiday weekend as the number of new local coronavirus cases surged. The city is on its highest coronavirus alert level, with experts warning infections appear to be spreading rapidly and widely. Tokyo hit a new daily record of 293 cases last week, and the figure has stayed above 200 in recent days. Governor Koike said the city was seeing infections at restaurants and theaters, not just nightlife areas as in previous weeks. Clusters have also been reported at workplaces and schools. Japan has had just over 26,300 cases and close to 1,000 deaths since the disease was first detected in the country. Japan will begin a 4-day holiday from Thursday, with Friday the day that the now postponed Tokyo 2020 Olympics would have opened. The Games are now set to begin on July 23, 2021, and organizers will hold a small year-to-go celebration on Thursday, but without any spectators in light of the rising number of cases. In a related news, Organizing Committee President Yoshihiro Mori said the development of a coronavirus vaccine or treatment will be key to allowing the postponed Tokyo 2020 Olympics to open in a year's time. Asked what factors will be crucial for the rescheduled games to go ahead, Mori said it would be whether the coronavirus woe is settling down. Asked whether Tokyo could hold the games if the virus situation remained unchanged, Mori said, if things continue as they are now, we couldn't. But he said that scenario was hypothetical. Tokyo 2020 should have been opening on Friday, but the games were postponed in March as the coronavirus spread across the globe, marking the worst disruption to an Olympics since 2 editions were canceled during World War II. The games are now set to open on July 23rd, 2021. That is the latest for now. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you, Dennis, for your updates there in Japan. Keep it coming. Your reports. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Reporting live from Tokyo, Japan. This is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo congratulated for its, quote, principled responses concerning China in a joint press conference with British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab in London. Joining us live from the United Kingdom is Graham Thomas. Hello, Graham.
Good afternoon. Good evening, Alma.
Good evening from Manila. Go ahead.
From the United Kingdom, you're rightly saying the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has congratulated Britain for its principled responses concerning China in a joint conference with British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab in London. Pompeo is visiting the UK in a bid to pull Britain even closer in Washington's diplomatic tug-of-war with China. Let's listen in.
We've spoken today about our serious concerns about the situation in Hong Kong, particularly in relation to the national security legislation. We talked a bit about the UK offer to B&Os, what we're doing in suspending the extradition treaty, extending the arms embargo to Hong Kong. Mike gave me his perspective on it as well. We're coordinating together with the Five Eyes, and we also discussed next steps, including at G7. We also talked about ongoing discussions in relation to 5G and, crucially, how we can diversify our supply chains in relation to telecoms and the 5G network.
I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the British government for its principled responses to these challenges. You've made a sovereign decision to ban Huawei from future 5G networks. You've joined other free nations to condemn China's broken promises on the Sino-British Treaty. You generously opened your doors to Hong Kongers who seek nothing more than fleeing just for some freedom. And yesterday you suspended your extradition treaty and extended your arms embargo on China to Hong Kong itself. We support those sovereign choices. We think well done. We want every nation to work against that kind of activity. It's those actions. It's not about language. It's not about words. It's about we want every nation to work together to push back against the Chinese Communist Party's efforts in every dimension that I described to you today. That it certainly includes the United Kingdom, includes every country. We hope we can build out a coalition that understands this threat and will work collectively to convince the Chinese Communist Party it's not in their best interest to engage in this kind of behavior.
Pompeo's last visit to London in January came just days after Johnson ignored Washington's warnings and allowed China's tech giant Huawei to help roll out Britain's 5G network. It was a frosty affair that saw Pompeo accuse Britain of endangering Western intelligence sharing by putting China at the heart of its next-generation data system. Britain's relationship with China was then blooming as Johnson sought lucrative partners that could fill the void left by the UK's exit in January from the European Union. But the months that followed have seen Britain increasingly share the view within US President Donald Trump's administration that China was a global threat. Johnson's most dramatic policy reversal saw him order UK mobile providers to stop buying 5G equipment from Huawei starting next year and removing existing gear by 2027. London has also outraged Beijing by offering nearly 3 million residents of Hong Kong a pathway to UK citizenship in response to a highly controversial security law that China imposed on the former British colony last month. Britain on Monday risked worsening strained ties with China as it suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong in a protest at a controversial new security law in the territory. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab also announced an extension to Hong Kong of an arms embargo of potentially lethal weapons already in force against mainland China for the last 3 decades. China threatened unspecified countermeasures as Britain relaxed immigration rules for Hong Kongers with British overseas passports and the potential of citizenship. Let's listen in again.
中方敦促英方放弃在香港延续殖民影响的幻想，立即纠正错误，停止以任何方式干涉香港事务和中国内政，以免进一步损害中英关系。对于英方的错误行径，中方将予以有力的回击。
A Tuesday statement on the website of the Chinese embassy in Britain criticized the suspension of the treaty and said the UK side has gone even further down the wrong road. Raab said Britain wanted to engage constructively with China, acknowledging its extraordinary transformation and the key role it had to play in world affairs. But he said a positive relationship with a country that had international obligations as a global player also included the right to disagree. The security law had significantly changed key assumptions underpinning our extradition treaty, particularly a provision to try certain cases in mainland China, he said. The legislation does not provide legal or judicial safeguards, and there was concerns about its potential use in the former British territory, he added. Over to you, Alma.
All right, thank you very much, Graham, for your updates there in the United Kingdom. Keep the reports coming. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Reporting live from the United Kingdom for EBC News, I am Graham Thomas, and we live in interesting times.
Eagle News, we'll be right back.
Malaking parte ng pamumuhay namin ang agrikultura. Sa mother side ko, ang kanilang kalakal ay animal husbandry. Sila po ay nag-aalaga ng mga baka. Magmula po sa Pangasinan, napunta po ng Nueva Ecija. Ang father side ko naman po, mula po sa Spain, pagdating nila dito sa Pilipinas, sila po yung tinatawag na uring may lupa. Talagang nabuhay po kami, ibinuhay po sa amin ang agrikultura. Mga mahal kong kababayan, ito po si Robin Padilla. Inaanyayahan ko po kayong manood ng Unlad, Kaagapay sa Hanap Buhay. Dito po sa Net 25.
May kaagapay sa hanap buhay.
Beijing said the United States has ordered China to close its Houston consulate in what it called a political provocation that will further harm diplomatic relations. The move comes as tensions soar between the world's two biggest economies on a number of fronts, including a controversial national security law in the semi-autonomous Hong Kong. Take a look.
On July the 21st, the U.S. side abruptly informed China to close its consulate general in Houston. This political provocation is unilateral, initiated by the U.S. side in violation of international law and basic norms guiding international relations and relevant stipulations of China-U.S. consular agreement. China strongly condemns this outrageous and unjustified move to sabotage China-U.S. relations. The Chinese side urges the U.S. side to immediately retract this wrong decision. Otherwise, the Chinese side will make legitimate and necessary response. The U.S. blame-shifting and discrediting campaign against China has been going on for quite some time, attacking China's political system, harassing for no reason China's diplomatic staff in the U.S., intimidating, examining Chinese students in the U.S., sometimes seizing their electric equipment or even detaining them for no good cause. This time, asking the Chinese side to close its consulate general in Houston, this is an unprecedented escalation. China upholds the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs. It's never in our genes to infiltrate or interfere in others' internal affairs. China's diplomatic missions in the U.S. have been working to enhance mutual trust and friendship between the two peoples. And in accordance with the two conventions, Vienna Conventions, China has been providing convenience to the American diplomatic staff in China. But what the U.S. has done, in last October and in this June, the U.S. side has put some unwarranted limitations on Chinese diplomatic staff. For several times, it opened China's diplomatic parcels and searched the Chinese staff's properties. Because of this discrediting campaign, Chinese embassy in the U.S. has received death threats and bomb threats. And its embassy in China always published anti-China articles attacking China's political systems. So in comparison, who is interfering in other countries' internal affairs, who is infiltrating and stirring up confrontation, is not a very difficult answer. In fact, in terms of the number of diplomatic missions and diplomatic staff, the U.S. has far more diplomatic missions and staff working in China. So if the U.S. is bent on going down this wrong path, we will resolutely respond.
Meanwhile, the United States said China's Houston consulate closed to protect American intellectual property. Meanwhile, according to local media in Houston, firefighters and police were called to the consulate building on Tuesday evening on reports that documents were being burned in the building's courtyard. The Twitter feed of the Houston Police Force said smoke was observed, but that officers were not granted access to enter the building. The Chinese consulate in Houston was opened in 1979, the first in the year the U.S. and the People's Republic of China established diplomatic relations, according to its website. The website says the office covers 8 southern U.S. states, including Texas and Florida, and has already 1 million people in the area registered at the consulate. There are 5 Chinese consulates in the U.S., as well as an embassy in Washington. President Trump's administration has ramped up pressure on China on a wide range of issues, imposing sanctions on Chinese officials over policies in Tibet and Xinjiang. And Washington has also infuriated Beijing by banning telecom giant Huawei and seeking the extradition from Canada of top company executive Meng Wanzhou. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has also urged the entire world to stand up to China during a visit to Britain. Two Chinese nationals have been indicted for seeking to steal COVID-19 vaccine research and hacking hundreds of companies in the U.S. and abroad, including defense contractors, according to the U.S. Justice Department. The indictment comes amid rising tensions between the two global superpowers, fueled by the coronavirus pandemic, which President Trump blames on China. Let's listen in.
The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Washington, the National Security Division have charged 2 Chinese hackers working with the Chinese Ministry of State Security, including the Guangdong State Security Department, GSSD, of the MSS, with a sweeping global computer intrusion campaign. The indictment also highlights how the Chinese government is willing to turn a blind eye to prolific criminal hackers operating within its borders. Although the indictment alleges the defendants conducted activity on behalf of the MSS, some of the defendants' alleged criminal activities were conducted for their personal profit. China has now taken its place alongside Russia, Iran, and North Korea in that shameful club of nations that provide a safe haven for cyber criminals in exchange for those criminals being on call for the benefit of the state. Here to feed the Chinese Communist Party's appetite for American and other non-Chinese companies' hard-earned intellectual property, including COVID-19 research. With the top cover provided by state officials, these criminals are given free rein to victimize law-abiding citizens around the world. All of these activities, state-sponsored theft of intellectual property, and knowingly providing a safe haven for cyber criminals run afoul of norms of acceptable behavior in cyberspace, which the international community must address.
The Justice Department said Li and Dong, who were classmates at an electrical engineering college in Chengdu, have been engaged in a hacking campaign for the past 10 years. And they've targeted companies in the United States, Australia, Belgium, Germany, Japan, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Spain, South Korea, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. Li and Dong allegedly stole information from defense contractors regarding military satellite programs, military wireless networks, and communication systems, and microwave and laser systems. The indictment was returned by a grand jury in the Eastern District of Washington State on July 7, but was only unsealed on Tuesday. Li and Dong were charged with conspiracy to commit computer fraud, conspiracy to commit theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, unauthorized access of a computer, and identity theft. China accused the United States last month of smearing Beijing following allegations that Chinese hackers were attempting to steal the coronavirus research. And the claims have added fuel to the tensions between the global superpowers, which have already traded bars over the origin of the pandemic that has killed more than 600,000 people since it emerged in China late last year. In response, China accused the United States of slander after 2 Chinese nationals were indicted for seeking to steal coronavirus vaccine research and hacking hundreds of companies. It also said that French claims about the imprisonment and ethnic and religious minorities in Xinjiang region are unacceptable. Let's listen in.
对此有何回应？ The Chinese government is a staunch supporter and champion of cyber safety. We've been cracking down on all forms of cyber attacks and cyber crimes. We demand the US side to immediately stop discrediting China on the issue of cybersecurity. I want to draw your attention to some reports made by the US media that US hackers are expanding their cyber espionage activities. subsidies according to a mandate from its government. And as proved by the PRISM incident, the U.S. has been carrying out the largest scale of cyber espionage worldwide. This is typical, the thief calling stop thief. What is more concerning is that those hackers, backed by the U.S. administration, could launch cyber attack on key infrastructure of other countries without mandate, without authorization from high-level officials. This could cause strategic misjudgment, leading to consequences more severe, more serious than cyber stealing. It serves the interests of all countries to ensure peace and stability of cyberspace. Cyberspace should not become a new war theater. And for those who want to seek hegemony in the cyberspace, will only end up hurting their own interests.
Hong Kong police used pepper spray to disperse small groups of demonstrators and reporters inside a mall at a rally marking the one-year anniversary of an attack on pro-democracy protesters at a metro station. Take a look. Hong Kong reported 113 new coronavirus infections on Wednesday, a new daily record as the sudden surge in cases shows no signs of slowing despite ramped-up social distancing rules. The finance hub was one of the first places to be struck by the virus when it emerged from central China, but the city had impressive success in tackling the disease, all but ending local transmissions by late June. However, infections have spiked again this month, and doctors say a new outbreak is spreading out of control in the densely packed territory of 7.5 million people. Hong Kong is at the most critical moment, according to Health Minister Sophia Chan. She said this, and she appealed for people to cancel all the unnecessary outings. Earlier this month, officials reimposed social distancing measures, shut some businesses, and reduced dine-in hours. Health officials have also ordered people to wear masks on transport and from Thursday in all public indoor venues. More than 800 infections have been confirmed in the last fortnight alone, more than a third since the virus hit the city. Only 8 of the 113 new cases reported on Wednesday were imported, meaning the rest have been contracted locally. Officials were unable to identify the transmission source in 60% of the cases, meaning the disease is spreading. The city has had 2,132 infections with 14 deaths in total. And workers dig new graves in a Johannesburg cemetery as South Africa's death toll from the coronavirus pandemic spikes. South Africa's death toll from the coronavirus has passed the 5,000 mark, according to official figures released on Sunday by the continent's hardest hit country. Now today, there are now 381,798 confirmed coronavirus cases, 208,144 recoveries, and 5,368 deaths in the country. Minister of Health Zweli Mikis urged citizens to respect recommended hygiene measures. Experts are warning fragile healthcare systems in many African countries could be overwhelmed in the face of a severe outbreak of COVID-19. We'll take a short break. Eagle News will be right back.
tomorrow, tomorrow. I love ya, tomorrow. You're always a day away.
Ukrainian police freed 13 hostages and arrested an armed man who held them on a bus for more than 12 hours on Tuesday. Take a look. The SBU Security Service said a joint operation had resulted in all the hostages being released unharmed after a police standoff in the western city of Lutsk with a man who threatened to detonate an explosive device unless his strange requests were met. The tense hostage situation seemed to be resolved swiftly after the man spoke on the phone with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who then recorded a short video apparently meeting one of the man's demands. 3 hostages were quickly let go, followed by the rest about an hour later. The man initially made contact with the police, identifying himself as Maxim Plokhoy, a pseudonym which translates to Bad Maxim, according to police. He was identified as I said, Maxim Krivosh, 44, who had previously spent around 10 years in prison on various charges. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky posted a brief video message on his Facebook page to urge Ukrainians to watch a film, as the hostage taker had wanted. Now, minutes later, the man surrendered to the police, and authorities said all the 13 hostages were freed. Qatar Airways said it will seek $5 billion in compensation from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt for closing their airspace to the flag carrier as part of a regional feud. The arbitration seek redress for the blockading states' actions to remove Qatar Airways from their markets and to forbid the airline from flying over their airspace. The airline said in a statement, they said that at least $5 billion would be sought. The International Court of Justice last week ruled that Qatar could challenge the airspace restrictions imposed by the 4 countries before the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO. The overflight restrictions are part of a raft of measures taken by the Saudi-led nations since June of 2017, part of their coordinated effort to pressure Qatar over its alleged support for radical Islamist movements and Iran. And Qatar repeatedly denied the allegations and sued the 4 countries before the ICAO. Qatar Airways is the second largest airline in the Middle East after Dubai-based Emirates, operating a modern fleet of 250 aircraft. Since the start of the air embargo, the national carrier has posted losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. And Moscow will subsidize holidays taken by Russian tourists who vacation at home instead of the Mediterranean, according to Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin on Wednesday. The push to boost domestic tourism comes after officials lifted most coronavirus restrictions in June. Yet Russians are still barred from holidaying abroad due to the international travel controls imposed to slow the pandemic. And we have already provided subsidies in the amount of about 3.5 billion rubles, or $49.3 billion to tour operators, according to Prime Minister Mishustin. He told this to Parliament during a report on government work in 2019. The government has decided to allocate an additional $15 billion, or $211 million to develop domestic tourism, which will be used to partially compensate Russians who vacation at home. Russians will receive between 5,000 rubles, or $70, and 15,000 rubles, or $211, depending on the tour. The tours would have to be at least 5 nights long and cost at least 25,000 rubles, or $352. The promotion would begin in August and last through December 20. forest loss is continuing globally, but it is also slowing down, even if not nearly enough, according to UN experts. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, the world has lost some 178 million hectares of forest since 1990, an area about the size of Libya. But on a more positive note, more than 700 million hectares are in protected areas, and globally, around a fifth of forests have sustainable management plans in place. Let's listen in.
Of course, a report like this has a number of new findings, but let me highlight three of them. First of all, the forest area loss and the deforestation are slowing down, which is a great news. But we are still losing 4.7 million hectares per forest. Most of that loss happens in sub-Saharan Africa and in South America, but also in Southeastern Asia we still lose about 1 million hectares of forest every year. The second is that the area of forest found within legally established protected areas is increasing. And in fact, it has now reached 18%. This is good news because that means that the Aichi Biodiversity Target 11 of protecting 17% of terrestrial ecosystems has been met for forests. And finally, the area of forest under sustainable management plans is increasing. The Global Forest Resources Assessment is the most comprehensive assessment of forest resources, their management and uses that exists. It's actually the only one that covers more than 60 different variables altogether. So the Global Forest Resources Assessment is the reference against which all the other forest resource information is being compared, and it is the reference also that is being used to support many international processes, and as, for example, the Rio Conventions, the Convention on Biological Diversity, Convention on Climate Change, and so on and so forth.
Millions of people around the world depend on forests for their food security and livelihoods, but it's also crucially important to protect forests by conserving natural resources as they harbor most of the Earth's biodiversity on land and mitigate the effects of climate change, according to FAO. It noted that forests contain 60,000 different tree species, 80% of all amphibians, 75% of bird species, and 68% of the Earth's mammals.
In fact, it has now reached 18%.
Japan must act to tackle rampant abuse of youth athletes by sports coaches before it hosts the coronavirus-delayed Tokyo 2020 Olympics next year, according to activists today. Now, the call comes after a new report warned that abusive behavior by coaches remain common in the country. Let's listen in.
With the energy and the international attention Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympics bring to Japan, we can change. We can kick abuse out of sport. After one year, when Tokyo 2020 starts, I wish Japan will be proud of its reform to protect its own children from abuse in sport and embrace this reform as an important and lasting legacy of Tokyo 2020. While the 2020 Games now delayed for a year due to the pandemic, Human Rights Watch is calling on Japan to take decisive action and to lead in tackling this global crisis of athlete abuse in sport.
現場の指導者たちが勝たなきゃということで事故が発生し始めているんではないかと思います。どうしても完全なゼロにならない重篤な事故も起こり続けているのは現場の指導者の方たちにまでその全従連の緊迫感というかそういう切実さが伝わっていないのが現実だからだと思います。高次脳障害というのは、例えば息子の場合でもういっぱいある障害があるんですけど脳の中がめちゃくちゃにやられてますのでまず記憶ができません。新しいことが入りません。皆さんが 2,3 回でできることが50回ぐらい努力して覚えればできます。でもそのぐらい努力しないとダメ。だから息子の場合は外に出ると方向感覚が全くダメです。
Her son, and now 30 years old, is still suffering the effects of this injury and requires close supervision by his family and medical professionals. Abuse in Japanese sports has made headlines in recent years. In 2018, a 13-year-old boy in a school badminton team killed himself, with his parents accusing the boy's coach of long-standing verbal insults and abuse. Violence is also often reported in Japan's sumo stables, and in 2013, a National Olympic judo coach stepped down after elite grapplers accused him of abuse and violence. The group documented the experiences of more than 800 former child athletes, including Olympians, in 50 sports across the nation, and it found that many had been punched, kicked, or experienced verbal abuse, while others reported being ordered to eat excessively, denied water, or told to train even when injured. And finally in our news, Tokyo Sunshine Aquarium opened a new exhibition area called Jellyfish Space, featuring large panoramic fish tanks where visitors can feel as if they're surrounded by schools of the floating luminescent invertebrates. Take a look.
クラゲのですね、魅力的であるところをもっと最大限に引き出そうというところで、一つはクラゲパノラマ水槽ですね。横幅約14メートルもあって、少し湾曲していることによって水槽の前に行くと、まるで、暗いですね海の中で、クラゲの群れに中を、いるような水中感というのを体感していただけて。
And before we close, we leave you with a word of hope. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. See you again tomorrow evening. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.